All right. Well, welcome to our monthly Zoom gathering laboratory conversation. Um, uh, as usual, just to kind of give everybody, if you're visiting with us, or you're here for the first time, great, welcome. Whenever we talk, we just ask that folks introduce themselves, just kind of remind us your name and where you're serving in any context that would be good. Go ahead and stay muted for most of the time, unless you want to chat and talk, that would be great as well. So the way that I want to run today is kind of in more of a coaching kind of model where just want to ask what important things folks want to talk about, and we'll try to spend some time talking about those pieces. I do think there are some things starting to bubble up depending on where you are in the country and what's happening with your kind of your communities and everything. So um, I do want to talk about some hybrid things that are moving forward and want to have those conversations. But so let me just ask a little bit. What are some important things that you want to make sure we touch on today? And this is, anybody go ahead and lift that up, put stuff in the chat. That's the other thing. Use the chat as much as you want, can. I don't save the chat, but you can if you want. If there are links that are shared, feel free to go ahead and save that down. So just note, everybody, if you put stuff in the chat, somebody's going to save it. I do record this and I post it on my website. So on my website on YouTube, so people can track this later. So there you go. All right. So some transition from Zoom to hybrid. We'll talk about that. I'm sure everybody's thinking about what that's going to look like for people. Certainly. Other things that anybody wants to make sure we touch on? All right, equipment, yes. Yes. All right, so why don't let's talk about this hybrid thing a little bit that folks are going through, and I'll share a little bit about what we're doing to kind of launch us off, and then would love to hear you all talk a little bit about where you are and things you're thinking about. So again, I'm operating off of a hybrid understanding where no matter where you are, whether you are in person, kind of on the site, or if you're remote, you basically will have the same kind of experience. So we are intentionally not thinking about this as streaming. There's no judgment around however you're going to do it, but that's kind of our model is going to be, how can we best replicate this service so that if I have a person that kind of says, well, I just can't I'm not feeling well today, I can't make it, so I'd love to just participate remotely and still feel like they're there. So there are a couple of decisions we're making. One is we're still not going to stream probably to Facebook or YouTube. It'll just be in person and Zoom, because when you stream, you lose a lot of the Zoom kind of fun stuff. So we've kind of made that decision. The second thing that we're going to do is we're surveying the congregation. And if you looked at some of the stuff that I've shared before, I have a very long leadership survey. We're developing a short congregational survey so that folks can get to the point where they're understanding why we're moving to hybrid. If you were at our meeting last time, you saw I shared some information that talked about an early question was, what's your desire and what's the congregation's desire? And everybody was like, in person, there was a huge desire. But each of the small groups that we surveyed in our congregation, at the end, they said the most faithful decision was to go to hybrid. And so we're kind of operating off of that, which I thought was great. But we're going to do that with our larger congregation now, which is, we're I don't know, about 200 participants engagement, kind of, that would what I would say. And so we are in the process now of looking at technology. A couple of things that we're thinking about is doing a huge screen in front that would just have, so you'd have your Zoom experience up front with the faces, multiple 2 or 3 cameras that are movable, Mevos or something. We're just gonna what we've discovered is people love watching our organist play, and so we're actually gonna have a camera on the organ, and so that they can watch his fingers. And that's one of the things that everybody is like, oh, we never get to see that. So if you're on site now, we're going to be able to put that up front, even though the organist is back in the loft. So we thought that was one of those very hybrid-y things that the benefit people really like. And then we're going to have two-way cameras. So we'll have cameras that are going to be faced towards the congregation, and then one that'll be faced towards me with all the faces behind. And what we're going to be doing in some of the things we've been thinking about is much more movement in our physical location, because we don't think we're actually going to get that many people. We're getting a sense that we worshiped at about 100 to 110, that we'll probably have about 25. That's what we're gonna keep it. Our area is only allowing 25% capacity. So we're just going to keep ours at about 25 people. And so they can actually do a little bit of movement around. So that's kind of the stuff that we're thinking about. Would love to hear what you all are thinking about, how you're going to, I'll say one other thing that we are committed to make this hybrid thing work is we are going to have our leadership from multiple locations every week. So what I've told them is if we're going to do this hybrid thing well, that means that two Sundays a month, I'm preaching from home. So I will preach just like I've been doing the last year. And 2 Sundays I'll be on site. And 2 Sundays our liturgists will be on site. And 2 Sundays the liturgists will come from a remote space. So we're like forcing the idea every time that it's a hybrid experience. And so we've already started to play with that, where we have liturgists that are now coming in who will never be on site. And so that they're now part of a rotation. So we're institutionalizing participation that is not locked into physicality or assumed that it will eventually get there. So that's kind of where we're going. So let me hear, what are you all thinking? And when you share, it would be great if you could tell us the kind of the size congregation that you're coming from. That again, and I will say, I think hybrid can be done at any size. I think MB is on here. Yeah. So MB is kind of on one edge of with some small congregations yoked, and then there's some that are larger. So I think this can happen in any size, but would love to know. Let's spend a little bit of time. Just jump in. What are maybe 2 or 3 things you're thinking about in terms of hybrid kind of philosophy approach? And maybe if you're thinking about equipment, I'm hearing a lot of folks wanting to know, what are you thinking about equipment? And we may do a session just on equipment at some point, because there's some people in the Facebook group that are super nerdy about this stuff, and it's awesome. Not me. So, all right. So just jump in, go for it. Just Sally, go for it, Sally.
From Nashua, New Hampshire, Presbyterian Church. I have a congregation. We've got about 62 members. We've been having about 40 people joining us on Zoom. We are I've been Zooming from home. We're in the process this coming Sunday. I'm going to start Zooming. I'll be in the sanctuary with the Zoom team. Our hope is that by the first Sunday in May, to invite a few people into the sanctuary, socially distanced, mask, no singing, but we're going to do hybrid. So what we're practicing now is how to do hybrid in the sanctuary. We're not trying not to buy any equipment. We're using computers, iPads, phones we already have. We already had a projector, so we'll be projecting on the wall. With 62 members, we don't have a large budget, but just trying to take what we've got and transform that into the sanctuary.
Great, thank you.
We'll try.
That's awesome. Does your presbytery, so one of the things as I'm talking with folks is go to your judicatory. Are they offering any money for technological upgrades? Because it seems like people are just giving money away in a lot of
Our
places.
presbytery is a presbytery of Northern New England, and we have not applied for those funds. I keep suggesting to the session, but they're aware that some other churches are in a worse place financially than we are, and they've opted not to take those monies to be available for other churches.
Right. That's great. I think presbyteries, conferences, whatever judicatories are you in, if they're not helping to fund every congregation that needs it, then I'll just go ahead and make sure. But anyway, yeah, so because there may be a few tweaks. I think the camera piece and making sure you have a couple of sound pieces might be the next steps to begin to think about hybrid experience. But that's awesome, Sally. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. All right, other people want to share what are you thinking about? Grace, I see your hand up. Go for it.
Oh, yes, actually, my congregation, very small Appalachian rural, two joint worship congregation, we've done hybrid during the summer, June, July, August. I mean, through the summer, through the fall, we had hybrid worship. The difficulty from that experience is definitely it's a sound. The sound of the speaker of a speech sound is carried gratefully, but the music, the piano or organist playing was kind of distorted in the sound that we haven't figured out how to solve that one until we went back to Zoom only. And the second one is a camera. We use two different computer, one for congregation and one for the pulpit. But with the 2 to 3 cameras, is there any way we can control that easier than physical 2 computers or iPad? That's the question I have.
So, yeah. So, thank you, Grace. Wonderful. You and MB should probably chat a little bit about these two congregations being yoked together and trying to do things together. I think so. Yes, there are some ways to begin to use separate camera pieces, but you're going to look at multiple inputs, and some people are using this a little bit more. About how you're using multiple laptops depending on your bandwidth and kind of your physicality. So I don't know how many of you are doing in a small setting multiple cameras, but that would be something to share. Go ahead and share that in chat. The other thing about sound is what we've experienced and what we're beginning to play with a little more is if you can separately mic everything, you can use your current soundboard to get things in that are going to sound much better. So if you watch when we had Heather Lynn and Jason on the gathering, Jason talked a lot about how most of our congregational spaces would have a soundboard that's good enough if you can have everybody separately mic'd. We're miking our organ, which we're trying to figure out how to do that well, but we're miking our piano, we're miking everything separately so that your soundboard can control what's coming through your system. That way you're not going to get the distortion that you normally would. And again, that is a thing where I think folks are probably already have. Most of our churches have a soundboard, not all of them. And they aren't that expensive anymore. I mean, I think it ultimately, so that would be one. Anybody else want to chime in on responding to Grace? And then we'll move to another person. Anybody have some experience using multiple cameras in a smaller setup? All right, let's go to another person. Go for it. Or unless somebody wants to respond, just unmute, introduce yourself and share a bit.
Hi, this is Jeff Spencer, he, him. Niles Discovery Church in Fremont, California. BC, we were worshiping about 75 in worship, and AC, we're worshiping right now, or maybe it's DC during COVID. We're getting 75 to 80 computers, so we figure 100, 115 people. So our attendance actually has gone up during the pandemic. One of the things that we're doing right now is we've got 2 pastors, and one of us is in the sanctuary. Usually the preacher's in the sanctuary, the other person is in the office, what we call driving the bus, which is running the PowerPoint, and because that's got an Ethernet cable, and so there's a little more bandwidth for up. And but in the sanctuary we also have what we call the chancel cam, which is just a Android phone with Zoom on it that zooms in. And one of the things we do is we connect audio for that phone via dial-in, and then don't dial in. So there's no mic in there causing any feedback problems. So the only mic that's feeding into the system right now is the mic on the preacher's computer. So I think one of the things that I'm imagining is how do we, if we have multiple mics in the sanctuary, somebody's got to be controlling that board manually so that the mics are muted except for the one you want going into the system. And so there's going to be a tech job there that's ongoing, as well as somebody, we've got our backroom geek who's just running stuff now, doesn't have to do any of that sound stuff. So I'm a little concerned about how that's going to work for us.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Jeff. And I don't know if you're on the Facebook page as well. There are some conversations about developing job descriptions for future tech positions. Like the bunch of us, we're all thinking about what this might look like, even if it's part of your portfolio that needs to be fleshed out now. Like it can't just be, oh, and you run worship. Now it has to be like, okay, here's a part of my job that I'm doing this. Or if you're able to say, hey, we need to bring on somebody for 10 hours, what's that going to look like? Or, whatever. So I think there is some conversation going on in the Facebook group around job descriptions, because I think, Jeff, you're absolutely right. This is a new space that it can't be an afterthought anymore. So, but I think pointing to the soundboard piece, for sound, you got to have somebody that understands sound at a certain level, can work with your soundboard. So if you had somebody before, like our sound people are so excited to get back in the sanctuary and get back on the board. And it's not a fancy board at all, but they had a job and it's been taken away from them for the last year. And so they're just eager to sit back there and do our whatever channels. I don't even know all that stuff. But anyway, so thank you, Jeff. All right. Other folks, what are you doing? What are you thinking about hybrid pieces? Alan, go for it.
Yeah. So we
go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm sorry.
Where you're from. Yep.
I'm Alan Brame. I'm pastor of Hickman Presbyterian Church. It's a bedroom community of Lincoln, Nebraska. If anybody here is from Nebraska, I don't know you, but the Nebraska Presbyterian Foundation is looking for places to give money away in Nebraska. So anyway, that's one of the ways we're funding it. We installed an AV system about 5 years ago, and one of the things we found is wired is better than wireless always. And I know of people who've had problems with wireless stuff going on for a long time. So we had bid out. Our long-term goal was to have a live stream. We were thinking, pre-Zoom, and our long-term goal was to have a live stream. We even bid out a project with a local contractor to have 3 pan-tilt Zoom cameras, to have a video and audio controlling unit where you can switch views, and there may be some sound control in that as well. Of course, one of the things I realized after our last Zoom gathering a month ago was, oh my gosh, we've been doing this two-way interactive thing for a year. Why would I think people would be satisfied with a passive live stream after a year of being interactive? So we're shifting gears now. We're having our contractor rebid the job, and I'm looking for lots of input in terms of the miking everything. That's something we hadn't thought about, and the movement in the sanctuary, having multiple cameras, that's helpful. One of the things we're finding, we have a tech group of tech volunteers that have been running our AV system. And we're realizing we're going to have to recruit more volunteers or possibly find somebody who really knows what they're doing with this stuff part-time, like you were mentioning, Bruce. I am concerned about the question of music, because the music is very important in our sanctuary. Just kind of brainstorming, we're thinking also about putting a big screen in the front of the TV, in front of the sanctuary. We have one screen that's a projector for the PowerPoint presentation where we have our worship materials. We're thinking we may not be able to we can't mount a second projector like crisscrossing. That's not going to work. So we're thinking about going with a big screen TV or something like that for the Zoom feed. That's kind of where we are.
Great, thanks, Alan. Tell us the context for your church size, all that kind of thing.
Prior to COVID, we were worshiping about 95 to 100. on COVID, on Zoom. It's hard to guesstimate. We have a guy who guesstimates every week. It started off a little higher. It's been a little lower, in the 70s and 80s. We're going back to our COVID numbers are down, and so we're going back to worshiping in the sanctuary on March 21st. We're going to use Amiivo to broadcast it on Zoom. We don't know what to expect. We're gonna do masks. We're gonna do social, 6 foot of distance and all that kind of thing. We don't have any idea what's gonna happen, but we're gonna do the whole, reservations and assigned seating thing.
Well, we'll be interested to hear. I think, everybody's guessing how many people are going to come back. I mean, I think ultimately we were all just like, who's gonna come back? I mean, part of it is if your online Zoom has been meaningful to people, maybe they're going to be like, well, I'd really rather be in my pajamas.
I'll be surprised if we have 30.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're thinking. And we've, for others who are tracking attendance, we're just adding 20%. We've just basically said, track your number, add 20%. And that's what we're using for our attendance numbers. It kind of, we're just assuming that there's multiple people and all that kind of thing. We have found our numbers have kind of leveled off. So we're 80 to 100, generally speaking, and trying to figure out our one of the things we might want to talk about later is making that connection between attendance and engagement, and what does it mean to kind of how folks make that step. We are tracking now because you can on Zoom, or you can pull the information. If somebody has been there 5 out of 8 Sundays, they're getting a personal connection, whether they've left any information with us or not. So we've kind of decided if you've come 5 out of 8 Sundays, you're probably somewhat committed to us. And now we need to make the invitation. So our admin is pulling that, sending it to an elder whose side that's their project, is to hold a monthly, you're invited kind of thing to newer people, which I'm like, yeah, it seems like a great idea now that we can track that information. So there's an idea if you want to try to play with how do you make that connection back long term. The other thing I want to share, I would say, is this between streaming and hybrid, there's a lot in between. So I think you can do some really good interactive stuff on when you're streaming. If you have great tech deacons on your Facebook stream, right? If you have somebody who's really active there, you integrate that into worship where you're making sure that as you're talking or leading, whoever's doing it, you're naming people or things on the Facebook stream. Like you can draw that in. So like during prayers of the people, there's somebody on a laptop in the sanctuary who's on the Facebook piece that you could be able to say, hey, is there anybody from Facebook who's watching who have prayers? Or they can offer them back to you. But you can kind of find some places along that spectrum between straight streaming, I'm going to watch people worship, and this hybrid experience. The key would be not doing anything that makes the streaming people feel like they're not getting a full experience of what happens. So like you can't do multiple spots if you want the Facebook folks to feel like they're experiencing a very similar experience. So you can't refer to, well, I'm going to spotlight these 2 people because the Facebook folks are like, well, we don't see that. There's a reminder that we're not really in that. So you can do it. You just would have to simplify the whole service so that it fits a streaming creativity and interaction. So I do want to like just, whatever the capacity is going to be for your congregation and you can find somewhere in the middle. All right. That's enough talk. All right. Other people, what are you all thinking about? Introduce yourself, congregation context, and then what you're thinking about for hybrid. Just go ahead and jump in. You can use your react hand or wave or just unmute. What are you thinking? Don't be shy. I see Diane Alfeld. Welcome.
Hi, thanks. I'm from Community Presbyterian Church up in Vallejo, California. And my pastor asked me to take on the project of going hybrid. And prior to COVID, we did live stream. We used Media Shout. We have a 65-inch monitor mounted at the front of the church, so we were able to put song words and scripture and so forth on that. And we did that through Media Shout, but I'm thinking of ditching Media Shout and just using Zoom, and then recording the Zoom and putting it to live stream later in the day so that it's not same time. But it's just a matter of figuring out how to hook the equipment. We have a soundboard and 2 computers in the back with a camera, and it's like, is it just as easy as plugging the camera into the Zoom computer? Getting sound in with it doesn't get distorted is kind of what I think our biggest problem is going to be. And we're also talking about, at first, we have the choir is very active, but they're not going to be able to sing in the sanctuary for a while. So we're thinking that we will continue with recorded music. Our pianist currently records things, and we play them during our Sunday services. And our choir director will also take the piano that the accompanist has provided him, and he'll record 2-3 times with different different harmonies and so forth. So we're thinking of continuing some of that, but it's just trying to get the whole thing to work by controlling it from the back of the sanctuary, and that's where we're headed.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I'm as we've talked about early on, and I've always pushed, stay as simple as you can. Like, just because we have all the bells and whistles that we can use does not mean, like, again, if you've ever worshiped with First Pres Palo Alto, you've seen what we do. We barely do anything. We rarely pre-record. It's we have very few transitions, so it's the fewest opportunity for technological mess ups. So I'm always just keep it as simple as you can. And so maybe even just adding things on, that's kind of how we started, was what's the simplest version you can do, and then slowly add things on. Like, what can you handle? And then maybe do one more thing. So then you're kind of getting a sense of capacity and whether you need to put more resources in, all that kind of thing. So that's great, Dan. I mean, I'm glad that that you've been asked to do this. That means that they're putting some energy and resources, or at least you're putting energy and resources towards focusing on it. So that's really good. Scott, I'm going to invite you to go, and I'm going to put a link in. So there's been a little bit about screens. So this is just one that we use for our chapel. I just put it in the chat. It's not a very, it's bigger than most of what you all probably have already, but we're going to get one that's probably 2 or 3 times as big to be, it's going to be obnoxious. And a year ago, no one would ever have been willing to put it in the sanctuary. But now they're like, we want to be able to see faces. And I'm like, well, then you're going to have a big old screen that you would have never approved a year ago. So and they're like, okay, because we have these tiny screens that are fine for words, but there's no way it'll work for Zoom. So just get a sense of kind of what, like, the big movie screen is what we're putting up front. So, but I put a link in there. You can see our smaller version we use in our chapel. Scott, go for it.
Bruce, thanks. I love that you're actually posting actual equipment, because I've got one guy who's absolutely fascinated with screens and mics and all that. I'm Scott Clark. I'm pastor at First Presbyterian Church, San Anselmo, on the north part of the Bay Area, same area as Bruce. And context, church, about 250 membership. And our Zoom, rather oddly, hovers right at 114. Seems to be our sweet spot. But a church that also fully adopted the Bruce Reyes-Chow Zoom model, loves it to the point that grace abounds from the instruction slide has become a mantra, and we may even get t-shirts with it on there. I'm just, as we're looking at hybrid, I would echo, I think what I would add to the conversation is just to echo and underscore some of the problem areas that we're really struggling with. We have a lot of the similar values that everybody else is voicing, having folks who were homebound now present with us, having relatives from across the country, members who have moved away now back in our worshiping committee. There's determination not to lose that, but thinking of how it's not just people online watching what's going on in the sanctuary is a big challenge. For Ash Wednesday, we thought we'd launch a hybrid, but then health regs didn't really make that possible. So what we did is we tried to do hybrid worship leadership. So one of the musicians and I were in the sanctuary, and then the other musician who was leading congregational singing in our Zoom format and the liturgist were in the Zoom space. And so appreciate that. But we had all the microphone issues, and for the purposes of that, found two wireless mics that fed into something that served as a mixer and just plugged into USB port. And it worked great for spoken word, but not for our musicians. So, you know, as we think about this, our biggest challenges are equipment, figuring out cameras, sound, finding a sound that honors the work of the musicians, because when that sound quality is not what it should be, they feel like, understandably, like their work is not being honored, because it's not coming out in the way that they would love folks to experience it. But then also turning to staffing and thinking about, is this something that volunteers can do? And I think it's beyond our competencies, you know, which just, I think it's healthy, you know, that we just don't have anybody who knows sound and those things. So was really glad in the Facebook to see some job descriptions start popping up, because I think that will be helpful. I think I saw 2 in there, and it's what reminded me. I said, oh, I need to go and spend some time back with Bruce and good folks. So.
Yeah, so thank you, Scott. I would invite you to rewatch the Zoom lab. If somebody wants to go to YouTube and pull that up, or I'm not multitasking well enough, on my YouTube channel with YouTube Bruce Reyes-Chow, the one with Heather Lynn and Jason. Watch that one again, because he talks us really through the simplistic, for those of us that really don't understand it. And he mentions 2 or 3 equipment pieces that they're like very simply that they use. So there is a way to get, and if you've ever heard Heather Lynn, we bring Heather Lynn all the time to our congregation, because she sounds so amazing, and everybody's like, wow, this is Zoom. I'm like, yes, it can be done. So take a watch of that one again. I would, reach out to Heather Lynn and Jason. They make their way through the world with their music and with their kind of helping congregations, and they're very generous. But if you have some resources to help folks out that are kind of just always gigging, you use them. I mean, I think it's a great way to support those who are helping us figure this out. So that would definitely be one. Yeah, and I what I'm hearing a lot is we need to have an equipment session, like a specific one, and bring some people in that actually have not just understand it, but have been using it, so that we can kind of get a sense of what. And I think there are a few folks over in the Facebook group that are super into this, so we'll try to arrange a session for that. I know that Susan Phillips was asking to try to do a thing, and I don't think that ever happened. So we'll try to get that set up. Probably not for one of our monthlies. Maybe we'll do it and do another session on a Monday morning. So definitely hearing that. Thank you, Scott. All right, other folks, Howard, what are you thinking about? I'm gonna just unmute and introduce yourself if you want to share anything, or you have want to look and make sure. I'm just scrolling through the chat. We want to get to some other things for sure. Go for it. Yep, Carol.
I'm the minister at the Community Church of Mill Valley, UCC, and we have about 25 members, and we've been having about 30 in Zoom worship. We get more people on Zoom than we did in person. And at first was just a practical question. You said something about if people come 5 out of 8 times, does Zoom record who comes, or how do you keep track of that?
So you can generate a report of everybody who shows up on a particular date. And so you just need to then, so I'm not a database person, but our admin created a database that was able to tell us how often people showed up, and then had it kicks out a number. I don't know.
So
how
do
that
you
happens.
have people register to come?
Yes. So we use a
But this is a regular Zoom meeting, but you have people register?
that is our security measure. We
Mhm.
make people register. So again,
Okay.
that's a very good point. That if you don't have people register, then you have no way of tracking who shows up.
That's
So
exactly it. Mhm.
I would suggest if you are doing this long term, register you. And one, it's a Zoom bomb precaution,
Right.
and you get information. I mean, again, that's why we're doing 5 out of 8. If we did it, with you just showed up once, it might feel intrusive. But
Mhm.
5 out of 8, I kind of feel like, well, you now know who we are. We're
Mhm.
just gonna. It feels irresponsible for us not to actually make a personal introduction and invite to you. So that's kind of why we picked 5 of 8, because it's a pretty high bar,
Right.
actually. So, but we do use registration. I do
Mhm.
want to. So is that good, Carol?
Yes. Do people have to register each time, or can they
No,
register and
one
then they're
time,
registered? Okay.
one time, and their whole trip. Robin, go for it.
Yeah, you don't have, we don't have people register. We just make sure only to send out the meeting links on email. And yes, explore your report area. We do have a pro account, but that report, who's coming, how long they're there, that report is available
But
without registration.
Does it give you their email? But it doesn't give their email address, does it?
Yeah, I do remember seeing some email. I don't know the extent of it.
Okay. Maybe. I don't know. If any of you know more about that, because we've registered from the beginning. So
I think it depends on whether or not the person coming to the meeting without registration has an account with Zoom.
Okay.
Then Zoom knows
No.
who they are.
No,
No?
Yep.
no, it's there. I'll explore it and I'll do some, I'll
Yeah.
email you, Bruce.
Great. That'd be great. Yeah. I mean, if there was a way, I mean, it is a weird thing, right? I would just be really careful, because when you register, they know they're giving you their information, right? You're in a sense, they're opting in to
Mhm.
sharing information. When they don't register and then you still contact them, it might, like, you just got to make sure. Then that would be definitely making sure that that it doesn't feel creepy at all. Like, so just anyway. All right. So I did see a question. So yes, Heatherland Music, 1N, that's you can find Heatherland that way. And I will say, the thing I appreciate about Heatherland's artistry is that she and others are creating music that is theologically solid. Like, it is around gender and atonement stuff. I mean, just all Christology is solid. So if you align towards more of a progressive bent theologically, and you've always thought that you love the musicality of some more modern stuff, but the theology is just not where you are, Heather Lynn, another group is called 9 Beats. They are doing some really good, solid theological content that is also wonderful music. So definitely take a look for them. I want to share, I saw something popping up around, the many, yes. Also, thank you, Jeff. I want to comment on the Zoom fatigue question. We've been talking a lot about that, and I think there's a couple of pieces around that. The snarky part of me is always like, well, people hate meetings, and I'm like, well, if meetings are bad, yeah, I would hate them too. So there is a challenge for us to create experiences that are actually meaningful, right? So that's one. The other thing is, I think that people have been online world before pandemic, but at this point, all we have is our online Zoom experience. So I'm betting that once things open up, once Zoom is just another way we connect versus the only way we have to connect, the Zoom fatigue piece will go down. I think as soon as I know I can actually go have coffee, I can do a hospital visit, I can do this, and then I'm doing a Zoom service, that's different than all 5 of those things being on Zoom. And then, so I'm choosing to believe, I may be wrong, but I'm choosing to believe that the Zoom fatigue piece will ease off as we get more personal outside interaction with people. So it'll be an interesting thing for us to watch out for. And I push on that because I don't want the idea that we are in this Zoom fatigue world to be a reason that we don't move forward with some kind of online expression into the future. And I think I hear that from folks like, well, we're just going to be exhausted by Zoom. I'm like, I don't think this is our reality for the rest of our lives. I think that it'll just be one way we communicate, because people were doing this far before COVID. So if you need some encouragement to push through that, that's kind of what I'm saying with our folks is this isn't forever. And I will push us on to have meaningful experiences of Zoom. We have to really think about the platform, about how we're creating a meaningful worship experience that just happens to be online. And that's where I think it's more fun. Anyway, I could talk about that forever. All right, other folks, what are you thinking about? What are questions you have, or what are you thinking about your hybrid stuff? Yes, I'm seeing. Let me make sure that if there's anybody new, and then if you want to do a second time, go for it. What are you? Go ahead, unmute and introduce yourself, and go ahead, MB.
I'm MB McCandless. I pastor 2 small congregations in Northwest Ohio, and we're in either Zoom only or hybrid, depending on the color level that our state has. And we went from red to orange last Thursday. And so, which takes a long time to go back down. The way they have this thing set up, it's a lot easier to go up a level with infection, but to come back down, they have a lot of safeguards in place. Anyway, so we went back into hybrid worship this past Sunday, and I gave the sessions a couple of options. One was, let's wait another week and see if it stays at this lower level another week and then come back. Or know that, if we want to do the hybrid thing, it needs to be clear that it's mass. We're not going to be singing in the sanctuary. The music is going to be mainly produced through Zoom, and blah 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 blah. And in other words, we're going to follow our rules that we've already set. I was thrilled with Sunday. I could not have asked for it to go better. We were able to effectively do the hybrid worship. It was completely different than the first time we did it in July. And it was so exciting. And we had higher attendance than we've had in probably a month and a half. So
MB, can you describe how would you define hybrid in your space? Like, what does that mean for you? What does that mean? Yeah, how would you describe it?
I have a laptop on the pulpit with me, and I Zoom through there. I have several Zoom tech deacons, various places who, once I make them co-hosts, I don't do anything with people coming into the service. They do all of that. And then I have another person who handles all of the screen share. I don't do any screen sharing or anything. Like somebody else does all of that, and they're doing it connected through an Ethernet cable where they are. And in our sanctuary, I'm actually on Wi-Fi. We're working on getting that so that it's totally connected. And then I also have my iPhone set up, as somebody else mentioned, where with no sound at all coming through the iPhone, but where I can, and I just have it where I actually do it so that the camera is turned around. So if I'm holding it like this, it's taking a picture of everybody, not me, on Zoom. And then I will just set it down on a dark surface when I don't want that to be dealt with because it's me doing it. So during the sharing the peace of Christ or prayer concerns, then I will bring this up to show the whole congregation onto the, with everything.
Right.
But
how many people
do you have? A
do
lot of interactive stuff with our prayers of the people.
How many people do you have on site versus in
this
Zoom
past
world?
week, I mean, you have to realize it's small. We have about 69 members, average worship attendance, and that's a high number that's being reduced as we speak. We have probably 30 to 35 regularly in one church and 9 or 10 in another. Mm-hmm. And we've been doing worship together through Lent. And yesterday we probably had 25, 26 screens, and then about 15 people
Okay.
in one sanctuary.
So it's about 2/3, 1/3, 2/3
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
Zoom and 1/3 in person. Great. Yeah.
And it's been consistent that way, but it's totally possible to do it with just the stuff you have.
Yeah.
And we're looking to add to it, but I think your advice of start with simple and just add gradually, that's probably the best advice ever.
Yeah. I hope I have better advice at some things at some point, but yes,
No, that's actually true
that's
in all of life.
That may be
All of
true.
life.
That may be
Start
true.
with the simple,
Start
the
simple.
things you do the best, and then gradually build on it.
That's-
I stand by that.
There you go. There you go. All
I
right.
have a
Thank you.
question
Thank you,
to
MB.
MV.
Yeah, MB, and then go ahead, Grace, and then Michael. Go ahead, Grace.
Yeah, MV, you said this time the hybrid experience is much better than before. And what do you think the key make it? What's actually the better, and what contributed to that?
Part of it is we have learned how to do it better. So we know we're have much more facility than we did before. And we're doing music better online now than we were before. So bringing that into the sanctuary was way easier, where before we were trying to do it in the sanctuary and send it to Zoom. So it's kind of the backwards piece of that. And then I also think that I think that's mainly it. We have a better sense of what we're doing. And I also think Zoom is much better now than it was 6 months ago. It's dramatically improved as far as music. So
yeah, great, thank you. All right, Michael, go for it.
Okay, Michael Newhart, and I am interim pastor of a church, Baptist church outside of Rochester, New York. And I'm new, so I cannot give you any BC stats. However, we have around 30 devices connected during Zoom. The congregation went, they were on Zoom and then they went back to live. I mean, that is in-person worship services. I don't think I need to ask them this question, but I think when they were in the summer or fall or whenever they were doing in person, I don't think they were doing hybrid. I think in folks' mind, I think it's just Zoom or in person. I don't know that hybrid is, been seen as an option. So I'm wondering, how do you get people to think of hybrid as an option? I can imagine this kind of conversation that we've had here. People would say, there's just too much. I mean, we don't have the funds, we don't have the knowledge, the expertise to do this. So how do you address that?
Right. That's a very big question.
Right.
So I will say, I think the best way you're going to move to hybrid, if that's somewhere you want to go, is you've created experiences where it seems like the natural next step. I think it's going to be really hard to convince people that we need to do hybrid if they haven't had a meaningful interactive Zoom experience up to this point. Again, I think it's possible. So kind of how we've been talking about it. So one of the questions on the survey that we're asking is, not only what's your desire to come back to in person, because we want to name that, but the second question is, how will this impact your involvement and attendance in worship? And we're talking about worship specifically. And one of the main pieces that we've discovered and are discovering is that if we cut out our online experience, we would just lose engagement. And folks are like, we've been having these great experiences with people who are not here. We don't want to lose. So we've created, so I'm not having to do any convincing. Right. It's more like people are like, oh, well, of course we're going to move into this because we don't want to lose these, people we've reconnected to, but also these new people. So I think part of it is really understanding where they are now. And some of that was, again, I'll go back to creating a meaningful experience that folks are drawn to versus focusing on the technology. And that's where we all want to focus to, and people want to be able to say yes or no based on the technology. But I think if we've created a meaningful experience that happens to be taking advantage of the platform, then it becomes a natural progression. So I would begin to have conversations about what have we gained from, this is the question we asked early on, what have we gained from our experiences so far, and what have we lost? And begin to kind of weigh those and kind of hold those in harmony together, because that for me has been a way that people can name some benefits of this new way of gathering. That's one of the ways that we've done it, is begin to really get away from the technology almost, because I think that's an easy way to throw up roadblocks. You'll have to get to it eventually, but meaningful worship is what we're trying to do. I don't care where it's happening, but what does that look like? Other people want to respond to that.
So Bruce, I wanted to pick up on that because you had said something a few months ago, similar to what you said just now. And because of you talked about how people were seeing folks that they hadn't seen before and wanted to keep them, I started celebrating, because we do live Zoom, and whenever I'd see somebody who was in a different state or who was sick or whatever appear, I'd make a point in the service to welcome them, to say it's great to have so-and-so from Ohio or wherever. And then I began to talk to the session about, well, we don't want to lose so-and-so from Ohio or from Florida or whatever. And so the session just came to assume that hybrid was what we needed, because they wanted to keep those folks involved. So I didn't take a survey. I just did.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I'm sorry. I mean, I think the more you make it so that you're not trying to convince people, the better. I mean, I think that's just, again, just leadership in some ways. But I will say, so again, if like we do a question at the very beginning, we have one of our tech deacons just ask as people are coming in, tell us where you're coming from. Like, where are you? I mean, so unfortunately, my in-laws are having health issues. And so I'm in Arizona, and I've led worship from a hotel room for the last 2 weeks. And, so I'm like, I always say, I'm coming from our new Phoenix satellite location, right? So, I mean, but it's not as intimidating to kind of just share this information as it would be when you were in person. So I think that's a great idea. And again, the language you use in worship, it will help to communicate how hybrid you really are. Like, what's the language you use to create a space and recognize that this is just another space that we happen to all be gathering in. And like, that's just an assume. So I think that's a good way to approach it, is to begin to just see it as a hybrid space. And that way, when you start, I had a 94-year-old member in part of a conversation, and he said, going back in person only just seems like a step backwards. Why would we do that? And I'm like, I agree, totally agree. Like, I didn't have to do any convincing. So again, I think the more meaningful of an experience you're helping to create and can create, the more apt that there won't be as much convincing to have to do. All right. Any folks who haven't spoken yet, you want to go ahead? And again, I want to, hopefully if you're just eavesdropping or you're, lurking or anything, but if you want to share something, or go for it if you haven't talked yet.
Robin's waving.
Oh, go ahead, Robin. Go for it. I see the looking for mute button face.
Thank you.
There you go.
Okay, so I just put a snippet of one of the reports behind me.
Oh, okay.
And you'll see, I for some reason I couldn't add it to chat, but you'll see lots of people have the emails. There's a join time, join leave, amount of time they spend. And so it's really valuable to explore the reports area.
Yeah.
It's under admin. And you go to active host, and then you scroll down and you'll see meeting participants report.
Right.
So there you go.
That's great. Thank you, Robin. Yeah, my guess is that I think that both you and Jeff are right in that if they have a Zoom account, then that's where they're pulling the email from. So that's great. Yeah, you could, if you have them in there, again, I would be very careful, because they have not opted in to give you that information. So just as you're figuring out how you make contacts with them, not everybody may know that you get their email address if they're not a registering kind of thing. So maybe you mention that in worship if you're going to contact people, or do something where some kind of opt-in is always better than not. So that makes sense. All right. Grace, I see your hand up. Go for it.
Oh, thank you. I have two questions. Probably you covered this a lot through this our discussions, that you keep focusing on the key is creating the meaningful experience, worship experience. That's the key to everything. And I totally agree with you. But I wonder, in your specific worship experience past year, is there a couple of examples you really felt that, okay, I truly cut through this moment? I just want to hear that experience
Yeah.
that you share.
So again, I could talk about this for a long time. One thing is, and this is why I would, in some ways, how I lead worship in person and in the space are not very. It's like I am very much in the moment, naming what's happening, realities of the day, kind of worship leader. So if something goes wrong, I don't pretend that it's not going wrong, and that would have been in person or on Zoom, right? So that's one, is just my style tends to be kind of just in the moment. That's why we don't pre-record. And again, some people love pre-recording, others don't. It's personality in some ways. But I will say, I think a couple of the things that we've done that have created a meaningful worship experience is we have stayed simple. I mean, I'll go back to that. Like, we don't stream so that I can use what Zoom offers to make it be like, oh, that's something that we couldn't do when we were in person, right? So when we started communion from the very beginning, whether my denomination approved of that or not, and some of you Presbyterians out there know that the initial piece was do not have communion online, but we did, right? Bring me up on charges, whatever. But so we would, so like, I was like, okay, so everybody raise your bread or your pancake or your cracker or whatever you have and raise it to the camera. And people are like, whoa, like we see everybody share, like take advantage of the simplicity of Zoom. Same with the cup. Like now when I don't do the cup, we have another parish associate who does the cup on our service, and they hold their cup to the microphone. And so everybody hears their wine or juice, whatever, pouring into the cup. And we've also noticed that people now drink versus dip. And so I think there's just these subtle pieces that you couldn't do in person that you can now do. So we've just, but I'll say the biggest to creating a meaningful experience is taking away the distraction of the technology. So if you can, that's why we are so simple. I don't do very many transitions back and forth. I try not to do a lot of video because that just creates, for a number of people, depending on their bandwidth, they're gonna realize, oh, my bandwidth isn't, internet's not strong. So if you can take away the distraction, it's kind of like good sound people will always tell you that if you don't notice us, we've done a great job, right? So if you don't notice that the technology is there, then you've created a meaningful experience. And that means stripping it all the way down and just kind of starting at a baseline and then adding things up as you can handle them and the capacity. So simple, and just think of those small pieces. Like, what could you possibly do with everybody on a camera and, lifting something up and showing? Candlelight at night is amazing when you can have everybody dimmed and they can all hold a candle up and you see a screen full of candles. I mean, it was awesome when we did that for Christmas Eve. So I think those are just really thinking creatively about that. And the last thing I would say about creating meaningful experience for you as worship leaders is give yourself a little bit of grace. This is a muscle that most of you have not stretched. Some of us have been doing this online thing, and this is kind of in our wheelhouse, and we're like, sweet, we get to do this. That is not, I know, everybody's experience. And so I'm using this kind of muscle expression because you will pull a muscle on occasion and you'll be okay. Just don't tear it, right? That's why keep it, like, if you're going to start running, don't go run a marathon right off. Start short, but see it as a muscle that you're exercising and you're strengthening and you're stretching, and it will soon become muscle memory, and you'll be able to just kind of glide through this stuff without you realizing that you're now leading worship in a different space. So there you go. All right, I've got time for no more questions, but we could do one more because we've already gone. Anybody want to share a last word before we stop our time? All right, so I will remember to, somebody asked about the surveys. So in the Facebook group, I'll share again my main kind of working document that I'm using with a lot of presbyteries and people. Feel free to liberate away. We haven't developed a shorter 10-question one, but as soon as we get that done for our church, I will share that out as well. Our congregation, we've been talking about, we are sharing everything we can. So feel free to liberate whatever information you get from me or anything that's part of their gift and sharing my time with the church. So I'll make sure I share that out there. I'll get this posted in the next couple of days. And I think that's probably it. So thank you all for hanging out again. We'll see you next month. We'll set up a tech one, and we'll bring some people in who are really kind of diving into that, because that's not my thing. So, but we'll try and set that up as well so we can dive into the specifics. So again, thank you all. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you around. Okay, take care.